Polaris Dawn mission ended nearly as it began. The Crew Dragon named Resilience splashed down off the coast of Florida under the light of a nearly full moon, ending an historic commercial spaceflight.
And there you can
see. After launching in the pre-dawn hours of September 10th,
hello and welcome to the Dragon spacecraft.
The four-member crew spent the better part of the next 5 days pushing the boundaries of several SpaceX technologies, including the Dragon spacecraft.
Dragon, you've soared to over 1,400 kilometers, and you're farther from Earth than any other person since the last Apollo mission over 50 years ago.
The Starlink internet constellation, and SpaceX's new extravehicular activity suits. One of the biggest highlights of the mission, of course, was the Spacewalk performed on day 3 of the flight. It marked the first EVA without a government being involved in the mission. Spaceflight Now had the opportunity to speak with the full Polaris Dawn crew exactly 1 week after that historic spacewalk. We talked about some of the highlights of the mission, some of the learnings that came from it, and what's next for the Polaris program. So, enjoy our conversation with Commander Jared Isaacman, pilot Scott Kid Poteet, and mission specialists and SpaceX employees Anna Menon and Sarah Gillis. So thank you all so much for taking the time after a busy week and a busy mission with Polaris Dawn. Jared, I want to start with you since, we're just now exactly 1 week after the four of you experienced the vacuum of space on your spacewalk. I wonder, does it feel like that much time has passed since then? And, what have the first few days back on Earth been like?
Time continues to disappear for us. It melted away on orbit, and I don't think it's been any different since we've come home. As soon as we got off the helicopter, we were getting poked by all the scientists, brain MRIs. Flew out to JSC for bone scans and a bunch of ocular work. So it's been really busy. I think we have been able to catch up a little bit on sleep since we may have set some sort of a sleep deprivation record on orbit. But we're doing really well.
That's good to hear. Anna, before you launched, when we had the chance to speak back in July, you mentioned that you were going to, quote, keep your eyes wide open and have an open mind, hoping to be a sponge while I'm up there. So question to both you and Sarah, going from the trainer side of the coin to actually flying in Dragon, what was that experience like? And, how do you imagine now that you have that experience, that'll help you inform your training with future crews?
I think it was a fascinating experience to have experienced both sides. To just give an example, when we were sitting on the launch pad waiting for our T0 opportunity, I was transporting my mind into the days that I was sitting in mission control as a mission director for launch and thinking about what the team was going through in that moment, the conversations that they were having, the flight rules they were referencing. And so to now have experienced both sides, I think it's just really fascinating. I tried to soak it all in and record as many details as I could for my memories and really look forward to, feeding that back into supporting SpaceX on the other side of this in any way possible.
Yeah, similarly, it was really cool to actually experience how well the training program prepared us. Things that I think throughout the mission were, whenever we encountered something that would, throw off our timeline, we were extremely prepared and could shuffle who was handling what task and how we reprioritize stuff. It was just really, really cool to get to work with this crew on orbit and see it from the other side.
Get to that point, the idea of sort of shuffling and staying flexible. You had a jam-packed schedule, all four of you, while you were on orbit and certainly leading up to it. How closely did the execution of the mission follow along with the schedule that you had set out beforehand? I imagine obviously some things shuffle on the fly, but was it pretty one-to-one, or was it a little bit different than y'all were expecting?
I think it was very close. Well, let's just say everything that we had set out to accomplish that we briefed when we arrived to KSC, we got done. We may have had to eat into our sleep schedule every night, but we got it done. And it's so busy. We were fully prepared going into this mission to maximize every second of it, and I think we really did. So there's a lot that goes on up there that sometimes requires our attention in different places. So It just means we have to kind of pick up where we left off as soon as we get the opportunity to do so. So we got it all done, but I do think we probably ate into a little bit of our sleep schedule, and it was more than worth it.
Jared, just to stay with you for a second, being just now the second person to fly on board Crew Dragon spacecraft, in addition to Michael Lopez Alegria, I wonder how you thought the experience, putting aside all the stuff that you had to do while you were on Dragon, just experientially, how different or similar it was to Inspiration 4, going into it, your thoughts about it, but then coming out of it as well.
Well, I think some of the basics are the same. When you arrive on orbit, how you feel, that's undifferent. And then, there were quite a few differences. So even just kind of how you feel, everybody has this, an adaptation period. Well, we kind of exasperated that with our pre-breathe protocol. So you're getting used to going to space while you're like progressing your way up a very tall mountain as the pressure lowers. So just another thing to kind of have to combat while you're there. Obviously, the intensity of the schedule, with Inspiration 4 was about showing it can be done. We really tried to put it to work on Polaris Dawn. So we did maximize that time. And then, of course, things like the high apogee pass or the EVA in itself were very intense, experiences. Really, that just kind of goes to the heart of the objective. So some of the basics were absolutely the same, and there's a lot that's unique and special about what the four of us embarked on to do. And it was great living through it.
And Kid, to you did a really excellent job in describing sort of the sensation of launch and splashdown during the X spaces. I wonder, now that you've had a couple of days to really sit back and process, for those that will come, in the future Polaris missions, how you think for someone, like yourself, how you want to translate that knowledge to future crews and, what they'll experience in their mission profiles.
Yeah, I think we'll take the next, days, weeks, months to kind of reflect on our experiences. We all have different recollections of how we felt. It is truly a sensor overload throughout every phase of flight, from, the G transitions you experience on launch, as well as, you're deconditioned in space, microgravity, and then you're right back into the heavy Gs on the way down. So I think it's really important that we do reflect, journal some of these experiences and senses that we felt, and provide that information. We got two experts right here that will train future astronauts to go to space at SpaceX. So it's really important that we do communicate those experiences. It was an amazing experience, and there's so many things that we can relay. And it's truly important because, like Jared mentioned, it is an adaptation phase that you experience. From the space fog to visual acuity. I lost a little bit of nearsighted vision. It all returned. But those are all challenges that future astronauts will face, specifically when you talk about long duration space flight. And that's why we selected, these 40 science and research experiments. They identified these challenges that we'll face in these future longer duration missions. And hopefully the data that we collected will now, be taken back as well as our perception of what we experienced, and provide that information for future astronauts.
Well, sticking with the idea of the experiments that you all performed, Sarah, to you, since we talked a little bit about the golden disc that was in your eye that was working on sensing some ocular pressure and changes in vision. I wonder, I know it's still early days, but have you and your crewmates had the chance to talk with any of the researchers about some of their early findings, or is it still a little bit too soon post-mission to have really any good, data analysis and thoughts about it at this point?
Yeah, we spent like the first 48 hours after we were back from space continuing to collect data. So we're really barely out of that period at this point. I'm so curious to know the results. I wish the researchers had results at this point. Certainly, going through some of the vision changes Kit experienced and actually getting to firsthand see many of the things that happen when people adapt to microgravity. I have so many curiosities about what they're going to find in the research. I really hope we hear soon, and as they start digging in early findings. But I think there's a lot of data analysis that needs to happen. Really excited to see the outcomes.
And Anna, Kid mentioned a second ago about, really chronicling the details of this mission. And you and I talked about your passion for journaling, both, as it relates to spaceflight and just life in general. So I'm curious, while you were on orbit, was there anything particular that really stood out to you as a moment that you wanted to chronicle and did while you were on orbit? And then when you returned, what was the first thing that you were sort of really excited to, put pen to paper on and make sure you got as clear of a memory of it as possible?
Great question. I did journal the whole time I was up there. Every day, every night would just try to record all of my memories from the day. There were many profound, really meaningful moments, both during the flight and then afterwards as well, and before. Some standout moments in flight. One was this moment when we, right after the EVA had finished, and I just put pen to paper and tried to record all of the strong sensations that I had remembered, thoughts that went through my mind, all of the different physical sensations that the body experienced going through that environment, and tried to just really freeze all of those memories in my mind. And then post splashdown, the very first thing I did, we got on the helicopter and we had a 2-hour flight back to meet our families. And I sat down and just started immediately trying to record all of my memories from the reentry sequence, because it was again, a sensory overload. There were sounds, there were sights, there were feelings, and so much I just wanted to remember from that whole, 1-hour descent phase. And so had the great pleasure of getting to write all that down, and I'm going to enjoy reliving that in the days and months to come.
Of course, one of the biggest highlights, from watching the mission, I'm sure from experiencing it, was the EVA on day 3, which, as mentioned at the top of our conversation, we're now just a week out from. Jared, starting with you on this one, as you were going through the test matrix, obviously it was time limited. You were trying to get through a number of items that were pre-planned, and you were sort of going by the book and the playbook that you guys had drawn up, I'm sure. As you were developing everything you were trying to accomplish during the EVA, given the time constraints, were there some things that you maybe would have liked to have done that had to be left on the cutting room floor? And if so, what would have been added given a longer EVA?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, but we went into it with, our priorities of going through the matrix and gathering data, because, we were taking a lot of people along that EVA journey with us. 2.5 years of development, a suit team that, worked nights and weekends forever, going through the evolution of the suit process until you had something that was flight ready. Honestly, I think we all felt a lot of pressure to make sure that we got out there and could do it right. And then, for the entire crew that was going through that same experience simultaneously, to make sure that, none of us, let the mission down. So that was where it was the focus. And it sure seemed like, enough time to get through it all. Wish I kind of went back and looked at the nose cone a little bit more where the camera was, but that wasn't where we needed to be. And so I guess that's really how I feel on it.
Just thinking back to the last time we talked virtually was when you all were at the Johnson Space Center going through some of the final EVA checkouts and tests in one of their vacuum chambers there. Question is really open for all of you, since you all experienced the vacuum of space. You were all there at Johnson. How closely similar was that final test to the experience of going through the EVA? Obviously, there are some things that you can't replicate on Earth, but maybe Kid or Sarah, starting with you on that one, just what was it like going from those final tests on Earth to actually making it happen on orbit?
I can just briefly cover and pass it off to Sarah. What I experienced in the vacuum chamber was actually felt a little more significant than actual on orbit. The pressure deltas, the sensations I felt with temperature decreases when that pressure was brought down, the voice changes, but it certainly is a parallel to what we experienced on orbit. Fairly identical, just different levels of significance. And what we did at Johnson Space Center is a testament to the training program that we've been through for the last 2.5 years. And it only reinforces, subjectively speaking, my opinion on what future astronauts should go through if and when they experience spaceflight. For example, the centrifuge. Those G transitions, especially on the way down, you're deconditioned and you're pulling 4.5 Gs. That certainly felt more like 5.5, 6+ Gs for 6 to 7 minutes. So very beneficial of all the training that went through, to include the vacuum chamber. That certainly boosted our confidence on the mental and emotional levels to ensure that we were set up for mission success.
Yeah, I really feel like the vacuum chamber was such a good primer for actually going and doing this out in space. I overall have immense confidence in the suit and we've all been through the entire design cycle of it, but just having that opportunity before you are actually in the vacuum of space with no atmosphere in your spacecraft was really important. And so I am really grateful we went through that. And I also agree I think it's almost an essential part of a suit test prior to going on an EVA. Because when you're actually out there, you don't need to be concerned about the temperature swings you're feeling or the rate of depressurization you need to clear with your ears. It's all that stuff can be second to the objectives you're undertaking.
Anna, jumping off of that, obviously there's a lot of data to be combed through with that EVA and the whole experience, both from you all as well as the suit team on the ground. Have the sort of thorough debriefs, especially in that part of the mission, already begun, or are those still coming up in the days and weeks, looking forward? And what does that exactly look like for those of us who, of course, aren't in the room?
Those are still coming up in the days and weeks that are coming. The first actually will happen on Monday. So there will be really thorough debriefs of really all phases of flight. We will, in addition, the SpaceX team does a really thorough data review of the entire mission's profile. And then finally, they're going to bring us out and have us actually sit in the capsule 3-dimensional simulator and talk through in the nitty-gritty detail firsthand with the engineers to really relive the experience and give feedback and talk together, learn together. So, looking forward to all of the phases of debrief that we have ahead. I think there's a lot of good learning to be had from this mission.
Sarah, bouncing it back over to you, stepping away from the spacewalk into another element of the mission. In talking in the space or the Twitter spaces back on the 17th, when you were discussing the performance you did of John Williams' Ray's theme, you mentioned that the final recording happened post spacewalk. Thinking about what led up to that, I'm sure there was a lot of rehearsal on the ground. The rehearsal, before you did the final recording. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the mechanics of that? I mean, you mentioned sort of having to shift, not having the benefit of gravity on, the violin and the bow itself, but did you have like an earpiece to allow you to hear the orchestra on the ground, to allow yourself to kind of sync up with them? Was there, a conductor giving you sort of like a metronome time? Like how are you sort of syncing what you were doing on orbit with, the performance on the ground, so it meshed in what we finally saw that, came through Starlink?
Yeah. So, as part of this big objective, testing out the Starlink network for the first time, we had a lot of fun coming and kind of bringing this whole endeavor to life. In order to make it happen, though, we could not actually have a live orchestra on the ground in sync with the spacecraft. So I had kind of the music of the orchestra in my ear that allowed me to play with them and kind of keep in tune and stay in sync. But it was really fun with these guys in the spacecraft to try and capture this. I think if you turn the camera around, it was almost chaos in the spacecraft, as we had, a microphone on the violin, a microphone on me, cables heading to a mixer, heading to a phone, another camera, just like all sorts of setup and cable chaos as everything's floating around. And everybody's trying to find like reasonable positions to hold the camera still and actually take footage. And so it's actually just like this beautifully chaotic moment of recording music in a spacecraft with a real wooden violin, it's just a very precious memory to me, being able to play a violin and then having all my crew members kind of supporting to just capture this imagery.
And of course, getting the opportunity to, I believe, briefly meet John Williams, before you launched. I think all of you were there for that moment. What was that like, meeting, such a prolific composer and, getting his blessing to move forward with this, kind of a project?
I am immensely grateful to John Williams for really enabling this to happen and allowing me to play Ray's theme from orbit. I don't think there's really a more stressful moment as a musician when you hear that you're going to be playing in front of John Williams with less than a week's notice. That was definitely one of the most stressful moments for me. But when he arrived and we kind of all greeted him when he arrived at the studio, he is just the kindest human being and was so excited about the entire endeavor, just asking questions and engaged. And I think it was really a highlight for all of us in the pre-mission lead up was that recording day.
It was truly an honor. I mean, I first saw him conduct at the Boston Pops when I was a teenager back in the 80s. So it was a cool experience.
I was going to say it was an opportunity for us to see another star for the first time as well too, because that was the first time we saw Cooper play the violin. So
oh really?
I mean, that wasn't like like in a living room setting. That was like a professional orchestra environment. And I mean, we all we spend a lot of time together working on our astronaut things, but everybody's got their own things in their life too. Kid never stops the cardio workouts. And, we get to see Anna as a mother with her kids all the time, and we knew that Sarah was a trained classical violinist, but we never saw it in action till that moment. So it's certainly very cool to see Jonathan Williams there too, but to see Sarah in her element, wailing away on the violin was pretty damn cool. Even better when we got to see it 730 kilometers above the Earth.
So I guess just jumping off that, Jared, was the plan for sort of the big public Starlink demonstration always going to be that? Or did that sort of come along a little bit further into the development of the Polaris Dawn sort of architecture?
I think we knew it from day one.
We certainly had to work out the details, but I think the dream of sharing music with the world was there from the get-go.
That's very cool. Thinking a little bit future, I know you're still very much going through the paces with Polaris Dawn right now, but to Anna and Sarah and Kit as well, have you thought about what your roles may be in future Polaris flights? I guess, does it serve the program more to have you as now experienced astronauts go back into space again with that knowledge, or do you imagine you'll have more terrestrial roles sort of akin to Inspiration 4 with future missions?
I think I would just say time will tell. And I think that, we are all really focused on Polaris Dawn right now and going through the debriefs, doing, that we still have some more research data collection to do in the days ahead. And so I think that's really where all of our focus is right now.
And Jared, as you're digesting the data, what are sort of the parts of the debrief that you're most looking forward to diving back into and, really, workshopping with, the Polaris team as well as the SpaceX folks?
I think in SpaceX, good form, they debrief the successes, and the imperfections equally well. If you do something really well, was there more room for us to even do it better? And, you apply that lens to some of the objectives, you can take it a next step forward. And then I think we're all interested in the things that, we could have done better on. But I mean, fundamentally, the whole idea of the Polaris program being a development initiative, to bridge the world of the Dragon that exists to go to and from the space station to the Starship, which exists to take us all over the solar system, is a pretty big gap. And the idea was to get out there with a couple key objectives on the first mission and learn an awful lot from them. And that's what will take place, not just weeks ahead. I mean, I suspect through the balance of the year. And once you've worked through it and figured out, again, what we could have done better in certain areas or where there's opportunity to do a whole lot more, that's when you start, thinking about, what the next mission looks like. But for now, we're just really eager to unpack what we just brought back from, just a few days ago.
And I think that spans.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that spans all the milestones that we accomplished, from the UVA to spacesuit, pushing the boundaries and the envelope on parameters and performance of the spacecraft, as well as the science and research. I mean, there was a reason why we selected these experiments for this mission. And even the initial analysis, talking with some of the PIs and some of the, based on my elementary experience of going through this and getting trained, there is a lot of correlation between, you're starting to see trends in your own subjective experiences. And we'll capitalize on the analysis of the experiments and add them for the next mission. And hopefully this is just a continuous evolution. This isn't a one and done chapter one. There's multiple pieces to this, and it can only advance space exploration.
To that point, Kid, given the gamut of science that you and your crewmates were doing while in orbit, were there any overlaps of experiments? Like, for instance, did you have the triggerfish contact in your eye while you were doing, another experiment, or was it important to sort of keep everything kind of segmented so you were taking good and very deliberate notes on each experiment sort of as they came?
I'll briefly answer in my own words, then I'm going to pass it off to the expert. But to answer your question, yes and yes. There was very dedicated, specific intent for each experiment, and we wanted to get it as accurate and valid data as we could collect under the circumstances. Was it chaos? 100%. We had our kit for science and research equipment. And as soon as you open that up in a microgravity, things are just floating around, and we got individual teams. We work together as groups to accomplish a lot of these experiments, because it required teamwork. Doing an ultrasound, doing these some of these ocular assessments with the QuickSee and the automated pupillometry. So yes, it was chaotic, but it was deliberate on how we executed and accomplished a lot of these experiments.
Yeah, I would just add to that we were always looking for efficiencies. We had teams in every single day, and so we divvied up the pieces of experimentation so that people were able to trade off hardware when it was ready. And so a team would tackle a certain experiment and then hand off that hardware to perhaps the other team, or we would divide and conquer. And so there was certainly, a lot of creativity and efficiency to make sure that we were able to get everything in that we possibly could, but then, extremely deliberate in all of the data that we were taking. We knew that, this was our one opportunity to get the data right for the scientists. And so we were really intentional with every data collection we did.
Speaking of data collection, Anna, how long into the future, how far into the future, I should say, will you guys continue to contribute, readings and data points to these researchers? I guess specifically, I'm thinking, you traveled out to the Van Allen radiation belt, and I imagine the impact of going there will be felt maybe not right away, but potentially could have some implications, further down the road. So I guess how far out does the Polaris Dawn mission essentially extend, given some of those readings that may still need to be taken in the future?
Our next major milestone for data collection is at return plus 30 days. So that's the major final one. But there certainly could be other things that pop in over the months and even more than that ahead.
And Jared, what was it like, when you reached that point, the highest apogee, since the Apollo era? I know it came early on in the mission. There was a lot that came after that, but did you all have sort of a moment to really let that sink in, pardon the pun, but the gravity of, being at that point in flight?
Well, I think whenever we had a break from an experiment, we would, get a chance to look out the window. I can tell you it's such a stark difference between perigee, our low point, and our apogee, the high point. I'm actually pretty excited. We think SpaceX was able to gather a few hours of nose cone footage and could time lapse that, because, when we're low, we're very low. We're the space station's at 440 kilometers. We were at 190 and actually probably got down to about 175 kilometers, you could see the contrails of airliners. You could see the airliner, the definition of farms, civilization. And when you're up at the top, it's that beautiful blue sphere with a lot of blackness around it. It's really incredible actually to see it's like that. From our perspective, we were just happy about all the learnings that take place in it. Like, a lot of people say, well, we went there, 50 years ago. Why is it special? It's because we haven't gone back, and we haven't gone back because it's very hard. It is a high radiation environment. There's a lot of micrometeorites out there. A lot of human created debris, sadly, that's out there that poses risks to spaceflight. And even just kind of coming home from that altitude is very challenging. A lot of coverage, things like Orion and their heat shield, big difference coming back to Earth from 300 kilometers versus 1400 versus the moon. So we're just happy it contributed to a lot of learning because we know there's a lot of great missions coming thereafter that are going to the moon and Mars. And honestly, we were thinking about the Artemis crew that, we are all going. And they're not far behind, and there'll be even grander missions thereafter. So I think we were just thinking about kind of everybody who stood to benefit from some of these objectives. Same way we feel about the EVA and Starlink. It's these are all meant to have great contribution back on Earth and for the future of human spaceflight.
Well, and you got a nice nod from Artemis 2 Commander Reed Weissman while you were at that point in the mission, which was pretty cool to see. Sarah, going through those swings of, apogee to perigee, you were going sort of between and through the orbital planes of the Starlink constellation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the performance of Starlink, and especially, as you were going through some of the more robust testing of it, both with sending the video down of your performance, but also when the four of you were doing I believe it was like about a 40-minute talk back with folks of the SpaceX team, sort of how the performance went and, just learnings from that at this point.
I think the whole process interfacing with the Starlink team was incredible. We were passing through the shell twice in orbit, and so that required the whole constellation to know where Dragon was and autonomously avoid us. Obviously, a lot of people watching on the ground make sure everything's going well, but it's just a really cool deconfliction strategy that was implemented for this mission. I think as far as performance go, we were all blown away. We had internet so much more often than we thought, and it really enabled all sorts of maximum efficiency communication with mission control, where if we were having a problem with a procedure, instead of fighting through it or going back and forth on the radio, we could just FaceTime them really quickly, have them figure out, see what we were seeing, and then jump back into the research. We were able to actually FaceTime our families instead of doing the standard nightly crew calls where we're 5 minutes with our family. It's mission control has to set it up. All four of us at some point were in each corner of the spacecraft able to FaceTime and say hello to our families. It was really cool to see, really just scratching the surface of what the potential is for applications of use in space. It was a huge team effort by the whole Starlink team to enable it, but it was really cool to see in space.
Yeah, maybe just layer on too, these human spaceflight missions do take an army. Mission control, which obviously Sarah and Anna spend a lot of their careers working in, is a team designed to, safely help, drive the execution of the mission. And they have backshops of lots of other people. The point is, if you can't access those resources, you put yourself at such a disadvantage. We probably, leveraging traditional, communication methods, TDRS and ground stations, were somewhere in the 70%. We don't have the exact number. That's just based on what I, saw from, when we were in and out of LOS. That's a lot of the mission not to have connectivity. And I guess we just set a new record with 19 people, but what are we going to do when we have 190 people or 1,900 people? So I think having that Starlink connectivity to bridge those communication gaps back with mission control bodes super well, for the future when we should have armadas of starships in space right now. 70% isn't good for 19 people. It's not going to be good for a bigger number.
And
yeah.
To emphasize the point that Sarah was making, I mean, that was truly a memory that I will never forget. Is, in between all the science and research, we had the opportunity to talk to the families. Just looking over at each of my crew members, we're all on the phone, earbuds in, everyone's got Zoom. my call was in the middle of the day and my kids are in school showing the class what we're doing. And just to have that opportunity to, a little spark of inspiration, the world is going to be a different place in the very not near or very near future, just based on this technology alone.
It sounds like your kids probably won the bring their parent to school day. Given the context of all of that, Sarah and or Anna, have there been some discussions, and maybe it's a little bit too early for this, but between the SpaceX Starlink teams as well as with NASA on integrating a version of the plug-and placer into other Dragon capsules for future missions to and from the space station, or is it a little bit too soon to talk about that type of integration across other missions?
I do think the team has plans to add it as a capability for future Dragons. I don't know at what point they'd cut it in for every flight, but it's just such a game changer. I can't imagine they wouldn't want to.
I know our time is starting to run short here, but Jared, obviously this mission continues the goal that you set out, and obviously many others as well, to support St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I wonder on this side of the mission, sort of how you feel like this whole enterprise has performed so far as pushing forward some of those objectives, whether it was, working with delivering Starlink capability locally or raising funds through the sale of Anna's book or some of the interactions you've had, just sort of how you and the crew are sort of thinking about this mission as far as that objective.
I think that we're really pleased with that, striking that balance of trying to address some of the hardships, the suffering, the just reality of day-to-day life that is just so imperfect, while also trying to build that better future for tomorrow. In a way, I feel like it was even reflected so well in our orbit. The up close and personal, if you will, at 170 some odd kilometers of seeing the day-to-day life of literally billions of people back up to, that absolutely perfect world, that is so unique amongst our galaxy. There's certainly nothing like it out there that we've seen or found yet. So I think it struck a good balance throughout the entire mission. I think it was reflected throughout all of our objectives from that great book reading. I mean, Anna being one of the women who now has traveled farthest from the Earth, to be able to, find her way home to her children and raise money for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, or connecting to, Sarah's passion with the violin in a way that, can help unite people all across the world, through a different medium than typically seen in human spaceflight, and raise money for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I think we did strike that right balance, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
And I guess just lastly, maybe going down the line from Anna then through to Sarah, given that you're maybe unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to think about it, on the other side of Polaris Dawn, the flight being wrapped up, how you're thinking about this mission now in the context of your careers and sort of what you wanted this to do for the benefit of future human spaceflight.
I think that we are just really pleased with how the mission went. I think we went into it with really ambitious objectives, and I'm thrilled that we were able to accomplish them for the greater team's benefit. While we were up there, it took a large team effort to do it, and we will all collectively learn a lot from it. And so, I entered this industry with a passion for spaceflight and a passion to contribute to human spaceflight. And so I am just incredibly thrilled to be able to continue to be a small part in that through the role on this mission.
I'm the old man of the group, so I'm just trying to keep up with these guys. So I'm just blessed to be a part of this mission. One attitude I've always tried to maintain is that this mission and this crew, it's bigger than any individual. It's a collective effort. And we just want to do our role and responsibilities to ensure that there is another chapter, and we do evolve our quest in space exploration, because again, it's bigger than us. So there's a lot of space out there, literally and figuratively, and there's a lot of smart engineers at SpaceX that are going to help continue with that quest.
I mean, to Kid's point, like we all know that there is another chapter ahead. But for now, I just don't want to turn the page. So we got a lot more to do with this crew between all the debriefs. We've got the Space Explorers Conference coming up. There is a lot of things that will keep us busy that we can remain focused on for Polaris Dawn. And when we get through all that and all the data review, then we can kind of look to turn the page about where to apply all of that knowledge and everything we gain towards something that's another step in the right direction. But that day's still a little bit out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think having witnessed so much of it firsthand, I'm really just so inspired and motivated to bring that back to the team and add to the knowledge base of what we're doing at SpaceX, because spaceflight is so cool and there are really big challenges we need to tackle before we can send hundreds of people to live among the stars. But now there's another data point and there's research that hopefully will unlock some of the mechanisms that we didn't understand before. So really just extremely looking forward to the debriefs and talking with the engineers, because they've spent two years of their lives committed to this. They've built incredible hardware, and we were just the ones that were fortunate enough to test it. But I'm really looking forward to bringing all that data back to the team.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to hearing all about it as information can be shared, and perhaps seeing one of the EVA suits show up at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex so that we can all see it up close someday. And I just throw in lastly, Kid, you call yourself the old man, but you're training for your 16th Ironman, so I call shenanigans on that.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you all so much for being generous with your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
so much.